Hello, everyone. My name is Bernadette Smith, and I am CEO of Equality Institute. And I want to welcome you to Five Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly LinkedIn Live show in which I discuss good vibes in DEI with a special guest. And today I am joined by Lekeshia Angelique. Lekeshia, would you please introduce yourself?
Hello, thank you so much for having me. As you said, I am Lekeshia Angelique. I'm the CEO of Lekeshia Angelique Consulting, where I help businesses create culturally responsive leaders on an equity based business model. So, all things DE and I, that huge umbrella that we have, without the overwhelm of feeling like they're going to do or say the wrong thing.
That's right. I love that. I love that that's part of your elevator pitch
Yes.
because I think that there are so many folks who are terrified of getting it wrong that they actually don't take any action at all.
Yes, it's the biggest barrier I've seen to inaction is that fear of just saying or doing the wrong thing.
Well, one of the reasons I love writing Five Things and I love this show is because every week I share stories of what organizations are taking action on. And
Yeah.
they're always stories that are positive, stories that are inspirational to me and hopefully to the readers and the viewers as well, because there's a lot of things going right. A lot of things and things that we should be excited by and inspired by. But what I have found in so many articles and so many stories that there's so much focus on the negativity and what's going wrong. And I know we have to be aware of that, but I prefer to lead from a place of aspiration, not from fear. And so, for those folks who are watching who don't get the Five Things newsletter, you can subscribe at theequalityinstitute.com/join. Every Saturday morning, you'll get some good vibes in DEI. And so, Lekeshia, let's get to it. Let's talk about the
Yes,
first story.
I really like this.
Me too. So this past Friday was International Day of Persons with Disabilities, and the theme is fighting for rights in the post-COVID era. So one of the inspiring stories that I found for this week is how TD Bank will now host the ERA service in all of their bank locations and at in-person events. And this service enables visually impaired customers to better conduct their banking business. It's essentially an app, and the app calls a trained agent who will then have camera access and be able to help the visually impaired person navigate. And it's actually similar to an app that I volunteer with called Be My Eyes.
My eyes.
So it's very, very cool. I also mentioned a few other things that have been done recently to be more inclusive of people with disabilities. But what do you think?
I think this is an amazing idea. And one of the things that usually happens with people with disabilities or trying to be accessible is that we think that it's going to be so expensive or so tedious that we just ignore it. So this whole population gets left out of really important things that are taken advantage for those of us who don't suffer from whatever they're suffering from. And I think this is a great concept, and it gives again that motivation for other organizations to be like, hey, maybe we should do something to better our accessibility in all of our locations.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that it's probably a low cost partnership for TD Bank, but how many retail stores, how many other banks, places with a storefront, hospital facilities, colleges,
Mhm.
right? How many places this can be used and allowing folks who are visually impaired to really navigate. Like you said, I take that for granted. I don't
Mhm.
have that experience, right? But this stuff really does matter, and there's roles for every organization to play in creating this type of atmosphere where everyone can do their job successfully.
Yes.
I'm just going to give a couple of other shout outs to some of the other products and adaptations that I've seen probably in the past month. One is an open source lotion lid for Olay lotion because the jars are hard to open for a
Mhm.
lot of folks. So they now have this lid that other companies can use because it's based on an open source design. MasterCard has a touch card, which has the ability to help people who are visually impaired distinguish between credit and debit cards and I don't know, some other kind of card, three different types. And then AMC theaters are now having closed caption screenings every week in all of their locations. So really cool stuff.
Really cool stuff happening. Love that.
Yeah, and I think that it's just, again, these are not radical changes, they're not radical experiences, but I think that they really do matter. And I have often found that the disability conversations gets left out of
Yes.
DEI.
Yes, it does. It's always the last thought. I read an article where, or maybe a social media post where they went to a restaurant and it was the first time ever in her life that she received a braille menu. And that's something you don't think about when you're, of course, able to see that someone would need a braille menu, or are you just describing things to someone, having to take, they're adapting on their own versus having these things easily accessible to them. So I really love all of these things that these companies are doing to show that they can be more accessible to everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those folks who are watching, think about what your organization can do to be more accessible. I mean, it could be simple partnerships like that with the ERA service. Okay, so other good vibes I learned is that the World Health Organization, you may know that there's a new COVID variant, Omicron. Well, they skipped a few Greek letters and moving on to Omicron. And they did that because some of the other Greek letters were skipped because the policy suggests avoiding causing offense to any cultural, social, national, regional, professional, or ethnic groups when naming. And so one of those Greek letters is Z, XI, which is actually a common Chinese last name. And that the World Health Organization was afraid that if a virus strain had that letter,
Mm-hmm.
it would reassociate folks with the virus being a Chinese virus, which caused lots of anti-Asian hate crimes.
Yes, I think that this is one of the pillars again of my business model is creating culturally responsive leaders. And this is an example of that. Having that knowledge and being able to skip that letter so that it doesn't perpetuate the hate in the aging community, because we know what happens when information is skewed and not used in the way it should be, right? So they totally skipping over that in order to create a to prevent those hate crimes from starting up again, where it's, I mean, not that they've stopped, but it would increase substantially if it was named after a Chinese letter or something related to the Asian population. And definitely skipping that is going to save a lot of lives, honestly.
Absolutely, I agree. And I think that there must be some sort of nudge built into the process of naming that sort of prompts people to reflect, okay,
Mm-hmm.
does this name have any other correlations, right, or connotations? And I think it's really important that that is part of the checklist,
Yep.
because otherwise we just sort of default to human bias.
Yep. Asking who does this help and who does this hurt and who's on your team is so important, because if you don't have this diversity of thought and people that can kind of challenge things as they're coming out, you will run into some of those biases, because we all have biases that go into our processes.
Exactly, exactly. All right, so the next story comes from Ann Arbor, Michigan, which became the first US city to require that all public restrooms, regardless of gender, including restrooms inside businesses, carry free period products. And I think this is just a fantastic public policy.
Yes, I don't know how many times I can say I love this, but I love this because period poverty, which is another name for what they're describing here, affects almost 500 million people around the globe. Taxing feminine products and not having access to adequate feminine products is a huge issue. And the extra mile they went to have it in both or all bathrooms instead
Mm-hmm.
of singling out a gender is just, again, showing their culturally responsive, again, being able
Mm-hmm.
to understand the needs that we're growing into. So I absolutely love this, and that they're helping to uh, reduce this problem.
Yeah, I agree. And just to for the viewers who don't understand why this they should be in all restrooms, is because not just women get periods,
Mm-hmm.
right? Folks who are non-binary, trans men may get periods, so it's not just an experience that women have. And also, if public restrooms, single stall public restrooms specifically, are labeled as all gender, not
Yes.
just the men's room and the women's room, which is the best practice to label all single stall restrooms as all gender, then anyone's could be using any restroom, right? And so
Right. Yes.
it's important to give out those period products equally and equitably. I love this. Okay, next, I mean, can you believe that tampons and stuff are still taxed in a lot of
I just can't believe I can't believe it. And honestly, again, thinking outside of ourselves, like I didn't even think about this as a huge problem until I really got deep into this work and was introduced to the period project. And I was like, that is, people don't go to school, they don't go to work, they it interrupts their everyday life not having enough money for feminine products. It's crazy. It's
it
mind
is.
blowing.
It
It's mind
is.
blowing.
It absolutely is, and it just highlights a lot of inequity.
Mm-hmm.
There's one example of all of the different ways that inequities show up. Okay, next up is Capital One Bank, which announced that they're going to stop charging overdraft fees. Overdraft fees bring Capital One $150 million a year, and they are stopping charging overdraft fees because they know that they disproportionately affect Black and Latinx customers who already face a significant wealth gap. So I, I think this is, I'm sure they're going to find another way to make up that money.
Yes.
But I think it will put pressure on some of the other banks to do the same.
Yes. Yes.
And I think
And
that's
can you
what's going to
imagine if it's bringing them $150 million in revenue? Imagine the other banks that are larger, how much revenue they're generating from this systematic barrier to creating generational wealth for the underrepresented populations. Like this is, again, huge. And I love it because it's creating that pressure for them, for the other banks to kind of step up and stop charging these bank fees ridiculously. And again, equity is not in that model.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. I love it. All right. So our last story today comes from the children's clothing company Primary. Primary now provides all employees a 4-day work week without expecting them to work longer on the other days. And they started this as a burnout prevention tactic last year during the earlier days of the pandemic, but it really worked. And they have seen a really small percentage of turnover compared to other organizations. So I do love this 4-day work week policy. We've seen a few other companies test it out. Primary is a relatively small company, but
Mm-hmm.
I expect we're going to start to see a lot more of this going forward.
Yeah, as you talked about the Great Resignation, people looking for organizations and companies where they really feel like they can belong and where they're finding that work-life balance is huge. And if an organization can't really offer more pay and better benefits, this is a great alternative for the 4-day work week. And we see that it's effective. They've already tested it. Being able to work 4 days a week is really huge for some people and families. It reduces childcare costs. There's all kind of third and fourth order effects of having a 4-day work week. So this is a great initiative that I'd like to see take off with Fire.
Yeah, I agree. We saw Microsoft test this in 2019 in Japan for a month, and they saw productivity increased by, I forget, 20 or 30%, like something astronomical.
Mm-hmm.
And they were also able to save on costs like, electricity at the
Yep.
office.
There's so many different third and fourth order effects of working only 4 days a week. This is great.
Yeah, it's great. I love that it can offer folks, especially those who are caregivers, like you said, the ability to save money
Mm-hmm.
and also better support their loved ones. So it is a hopefully a sign of things to come.
Yes.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Lekeshia, for being
Thank
my
you.
guest. If you don't already subscribe to the Five Things newsletter, subscribe at theequalityinstitute.com/join. And Lekeshia, how can folks find you?
Yes, you can follow me here on LinkedIn. Send a connection request. Love to connect with all kinds of people and organizations, as well as the DE&I Lounge on Facebook.
All right, great. Well, thanks for being here, and we'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.